Hello everybody, GrimRiver2458 here. Today I'm going to be starting a brand new series titled Nerf Restored, where I take blasters that have been covered in dirt, that do not work anymore, or have just been plain left outside. Today I'm going to be starting on my Goodwill Night Finder. My last thrifting video, I told about this find and it definitely needs some work. If you look at a regular Night Finder, you'll notice there's a priming rod there. This one doesn't have it. And this one's been all minimized and stuff. More on this in a second. But I really felt bad for this little Night Finder here. So I'm going to be teaching you how to make something that does not work and that's very dirty and turn it into something that, well, isn't. First, I'm going to take the screws out, and I'll show you the process of that. So the screwdriver I'm using is a #1 Husky repairing kit screwdriver. I don't know, it came with a whole bunch of screwdrivers. Pretty cheap for a good set of screwdrivers. Anyway, so you'll note with the Night Finder, there's a battery door, which I just unscrew here. I already took the liberty of taking out the old corroded batteries. As you can see, the old batteries were very rusty and leaky. Alright, then you're going to take a screwdriver and you're going to want to apply a lot of, not too much force, but pretty good amount of force, and do a sharp turn. What that does to the screw is it kind of pops loose from the plastic. Because when these are made, I guess it kind of sinks into the plastic. Alright, I'll get these screws undone and I'll open it with you guys. Alright, so I'm down to my last screw here. And I laid out these screws in a certain way. So these are your main body screws, all exterior screws. And you notice I have them in 3 different categories. One screw is about that big, and yes, they are all rusty. But if you look at this set of screws, if I line the heads up, they are, let's see if I can do this. You can see it's a little bit shorter. And if I take this screw and compare it to this other screw, keep in mind this is the screw that came from here. This one's a bit longer. The 2 short screws go in here, and your 2 long screws go right there. The rest of them are the exact same. Let's get to opening this. I do recommend using a small flathead. Something like this would be fine, but if you do happen to use a regular flathead, that could work too. So just kind of lift it and then just pry it just a little bit. You don't need to use a whole bunch of force to get these things open. Sometimes they can be stubborn. There we go. So I'll take out the 2 screws that were stubborn. If you do not have screws that come out of a screw port when you're unscrewing them, you can always just take a look back here and poke your screwdriver through them, and the screws will pop down. Now I am going to need to take this little rail attachment piece off, so we'll put that to the collection. Now we're just going to set the shell aside. Taking a look at our shell here, looks to just be pretty dusty, honestly. I'll go through what parts I will choose to keep, what parts I will choose not to keep. So I'm going to be making a minimized Night Finder, meaning that all this light stuff and dart holders are just going to be unnecessary for me. So you're going to make sure you want to throw your parts everywhere. I like to keep them to the side. I'm going to keep this. All the electronics are going to go But when you do take stuff like that, like this, that are screwed down that you're just gonna throw away, I recommend keeping the screws, because you never know when you're gonna need some screws. In fact, I have a whole bin, small bin, full of just screws. And I've used it a lot because when I'm modding, I find that screws just love to run away. And that is glued on. That, wow. I wish I could fast forward through this. Be so much easier. Anyway, like I said, I'm choosing to take every electronic piece out of this, taking the old battery terminals out, because I'm going to take the light out anyways, so there's going to be absolutely zero use for them for me. And two, these points actually look fine, but the points in here, I could clean them up if I chose to, but I'm going to choose not to clean them. Things like this, I might keep, because if I'm going to use that for an integration, then this would be a nice hole filler. I'm going to take this off. Now you can choose to unsolder these wires and keep the old wires, but since mine has some rust, I think the electronics are just going to be bad. So, like that. I'm going to throw these away. And this little micro switch I'm going to keep, because it might help me with something I need in the future if it doesn't look too bad. Doesn't look too bad. So, now you got your main night finder here. I'm gonna unscrew your trigger here. We're gonna keep this trigger, obviously. Wow, that is... okay. So I'm gonna keep the trigger spring. We'll keep the trigger, obviously. Then we're gonna unscrew the plunger. As you can tell, like I showed off, there isn't a plunger rod in this. So I expect there to be no plunger rod, obviously. Catch looks to be fine. And we got our plunger with the old spring, which doesn't look to be too bad. Have the old... oh wow. Oh geez, that is... she's crusty. Alright, well the AR is removed. That was pretty easy. So, right now I'm just going to clean it. I'm not going to modify it too much. I will, however, throw these things out. And I'm going to sort through all this together with you guys to show what I will be cleaning in the sink or bathtub. So, this piece does look dirty, but I have this donor night finder, so I will choose to not use any of this. I will, however, keep the spring, and I will clean up the O-ring because it still seems to have some flex to it, and the spring might be nice for something down the road. So what I like to do when I clean stuff is to take all the external pieces, like this trigger, kind of just dry fit it in. Do not include screws or any metal parts when you clean something, because all it's going to do is potentially rust it if you do not clean it goodly enough. I'm going to unscrew this little cap here for my battery terminals. Should probably show that. Right there. This is why I like to use a small screwdriver. Just kind of pop that out. As you can tell, that is pretty wasted. pretty garbage. So we're gonna throw this out. And I'm just gonna put this plate back on for aesthetic sake. And when you take apart your blaster, these are going to be the only things I'm cleaning, which is the trigger and the shell. And I'll show you how I clean that. Alright, so you're going to want to take your knife finder and an old toothbrush. Make sure it's not the one you currently use. Sorry about the echo in here, it's going to be hard. So you're going to want to take your shell, take all the parts in there, wet your toothbrush. I like to use this Dawn because it's just going to be a whole lot easier to clean. What you're going to do is put some on, take your smallest piece, get it a bit wet, just kind of start brushing it. Then you're going to want to rinse it. Set it aside. Basically do the same thing to the shell. So after your shell has been washed, you can just put it back together like this. And I'll show you what to do to dry it. So after you are done washing it, you're going to take some paper towel, take this back part, and just clean it. Now for small components like this, it takes like 2 seconds and then it's dry. But for main body shells, it takes a little while. With some love, it will be clean. As you can see, it's nice and shiny. You're going to continue this until you don't see too much water. And I recommend, if you do own an air compressor, to spray this with air so it gets all the water out from deep little crevices that you didn't see before or can't reach with paper towels. Or just use some Q-tips, go in places like the screw holes or hard to reach areas to get those water droplets. Alright, I'll come back to you when this is all clean. So for the purposes of me filming, I'm not going to completely dry these. It's just going to be kind of a put it together kind of situation. So I like to start on the opposite side of the shell, things that need to go back. Just for the knife finder, it's going to be this little rail attachment point. Now for the main blaster, I'm going to open this up, which is my donor knife finder. I'm going to take all the internals out of this that are the plunger tube and all of that, except for the trigger. Put this all back together, and I'll go over putting it together. Alright, so I got the donor's internals out. Now we're just going to plop them in this knife finder. Now the knife finder is one of the more simpler mechanisms, if I can speak, that would be great. Knife finder is one of the more simpler mechanisms. That's why people recommend to modify them as your first blaster to modify. Now the screws that hold them on are the exact size of the small, maybe a little bit taller, of the small screws for the body. But I'd recommend what you do when you take these things apart is to put the screws in categories. That's kind of what I did. Put your main body screws in sizes, and put all your internal screws up here next to the part that you took out. That's nice. Did crack it a little bit if you heard that, but I got another plunger tube here that's a whole lot better. So I'm not too worried about it. You got our trigger in. The trigger screw is a very tall washer head style screw. And it's silver, so it can't really be misplaced. There we go. And then we're going to take the little square here. That's this guy. He's very thin, and he's got threads in him. You're going to want to put it in this slot there. Make sure he's pushed all the way in, or he's not going to be happy. Then we take the other side of our shell, kind of manipulate things in. If your shell isn't going together, you can press down the rail attachment piece and it will close the shell a whole lot easier. That's interesting. So it won't release. Alright, let me figure this out. I wanted to do a quick note. The head for the plunger rod is going to be a long silver screw that just goes on the top here. And you screw in. Now I recommend when you work on older blasters like this one to grease up the plunger tube and grease up your O-ring, just so you have a nice smooth fit. So after some testing and looking into it, this is the old catch and this is the catch that came with it, or it came with the old donor shell. This catch is smaller than the other catch. I don't know how well you can see that, because this is going to be really hard to show. This one is too small. For some reason they changed the catch mechanism, but the triggers were the exact same, which was my first thought, which was to switch out the triggers. Now it engages just slightly. A good way to test things is to close the shell but not put any screws in, prime it and then deprime it to see if it catches and releases before you put all the screws back together and find out that you missed something. So we're going to put this back together like this. Remember to push that in there. Make sure everything looks flush. Of course mine's going to have some weird indentations there. And remember your long screws. I like to get the weird screws out of the way so I'm not rushing to find which ones go where when I'm putting all the main body screws in, because I like to do the hard thinking first and then just the brainless procedure of putting all the same screws back instead of the weird outliers. So you're going to want to put your really long screws in here. You're going to put your short screws in here. Like so. And then the rest of the screws are just your main body screws. I'll talk to you when it's assembled. So I'm on my last screw and I realized I should probably talk about some important things. First of all, you're never just going to want to approach a screw and start screwing it in. Because if you have ever screwed something in and it feels really tight, like you're digging into stuff, it's because you are digging into stuff. The threads themselves are what you're digging into. So what I like to do is kind of reverse it until I feel it or hear a click, and then go forward. A screw shouldn't take too much pressure to screw in. And now I have my battery door here, which is just going to sit in there. And this one has a K26 in it. And now this knife finder works again. So I'm going to find a dart. Yeah. So, I hope you liked this kind of informational video. Hope this was helpful. And I hope the series continues to help people learn. I'm going to do how to shell cut maybe. And I'm going to cut this whole area out to make it look like this. Alright. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any comments or suggestions, put them in the comment section below. Have a great rest of your day.